Hello, welcome. This is the first installment of my Dark Academia series, which I will be uploading primarily to Steady, but maybe also to other platforms. We'll have to wait and see on that account now, won't we? As promised, today I'm going to give an overview first and foremost about what dark academia entails, and then I'm going to be talking a little bit about one of the most important books, and some would say the origin of dark academia itself, which is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I will be looking at this work critically. Let me get my notes. Let me first start by talking a little bit about dark academia itself. So the genre has to do with more of an aesthetic and a style rather than a certain type of narrative. And the genre and style we're talking about is very much what you can see here. Scholarly style, sort of a dark style steeped in Greek and Latin and old languages and ancient texts and the arts, and studying at elite universities. So in that sense, anything that has sort of a university or school setting that can be considered as elite, with special secret societies, for example, and things that are learned in secret that maybe don't have any impact on the real world, or maybe they do, can be considered dark academia. One example that I won't be talking about here is Harry Potter, which could also be considered dark academia in the fantasy realm, of course. But most of the time when we are talking about dark academia, we're talking about a group of very extremely clever friends, a group of friends, or frenemies rather, and some sort of murder mystery involved with that. I will be talking about Saltburn in this series as well, the film, which has garnered some attention. But today, as I said, I will be talking about The Secret History by Donna Tartt. Donna Tartt is an author who writes books approximately every 10 years and is probably most famous for The Goldfinch, which was released, I believe, in 2013. She won a Pulitzer Prize for that book. However, The Goldfinch is a prime example of some of the problems that exist within dark academia, even though it won't be the topic of discussion for today, as it relies heavily on a sense of elitism, and that elitism often coincides with ideas of superior thinking, which in turn can be steeped in supremacist thinking, right? So we're talking about white supremacy. And there's a fairly uncritical view of the Eurocentricity of the learning institutions where these stories take place, their colonial histories, and diversity. Now, of course, there are books and stories and films that look at dark academia from, for example, a Black or POC or queer perspective, though queerness is often part of the original dark academia. We'll be talking about that in a little while as well. And sort of subvert expectations. Ace of Spades is an example of that, which we will be talking about in this series as well. The Secret History by Donna Tartt is a book series about Richard Papin, who goes to study in New England at a college, and he's roped into studying, he studies modern languages at first, but then he's roped into this elite little group of Greek and Latin students that is led by a very charismatic teacher called Julian. And Julian has high expectations of his students, who consist of the following group. So we have Richard Papin, who comes from a working class background but is trying to conceal that, and is in a way very arrogant and trying to accommodate to a more prestigious lifestyle. Then we have Henry Winter, who's like your genius, your stereotypical genius character, who's too up in the air, right, learning all sorts of obscure and non-obscure languages, able to communicate fluently in ancient Greek with Julian, and sort of the leader of the group. We have Francis Abernathy, our resident queer person, red-haired and a little bit hysterical, problematic. I'll come back to that in a second. We have the twins, Camilla and Charles, let me look up the name, I'm not good with names, Macaulay, who are like wistful, blonde, wide-eyed, out of this world type characters, a little bit incestuous. And then finally we have Edmund Corcoran, is called Bunny, and he is what we would consider like a very gaudy type of person, new rich, new money, not very academic. And this is not a spoiler for the book. From the very beginning, we learn that Bunny will be killed in the course of the novel, and that he will be killed by his peer group. I'm going to have to get into a little bit of spoilers now, so that I can discuss the issues with the book a little bit more properly. Donna Tartt in The Goldfinch has a character who uses the N-word quite a bit. There's a lot of racism, especially anti-black and anti-Asian racism in the book, which isn't normally caught by white readers in particular. The book is very beloved, and criticism is not something that a lot of readers want to hear about that book. And the same is true for The Secret History. Now, there's not quite as much racism in this book. There's only one instance where a Palestinian man in a heavy accent reacts to a clear case of racism, and that's not framed as sort of the righteous reaction in a way. Amplified by the fact that I was listening to the audiobook, and Donna Tartt in fact reads the audiobook, and so she does a very problematic Arabian accent during that part. The racism isn't the primary source of concern in this book. Basically, and now I'll get into the spoiler section of The Secret History. What happens is Julian, the teacher, introduces the group to Bacchus and bacchanals, right? As a concept, as something where one can lose oneself, or the ancient Greeks lost themselves in complete oblivion and delirium. And so this group of friends, with the exception of Richard at the beginning, including Bunny, they are trying to create a bacchanal, basically. In the end, they do so without Bunny because he can't really get into it, and he's not as intelligent as the rest of the group. Bunny is also not a very nice character. He's very homophobic. The F word is dropped fairly often in the book throughout, but especially by Bunny himself. So he's not part of the bacchanal, neither is Richard, our point of view character. But during the bacchanal, the group get very high and they accidentally kill someone. So they kill a person. But this is not a major problem for them, right? So they talk about it afterwards, and the characters do, and it's not that big of a problem. The problem is more that Bunny finds out about it and wants to tell on them, because to him it is more of a problem. And Richard finds out about it as well, but he's on the side of these other characters. And then Bunny finds out, he wants to kind of, tell people what's going on because he's not part of the group, and he starts blackmailing Henry in particular into going into Italy with him, etc., etc. And in the middle of the book, he's then killed. And after that, the group sort of falls apart more and more, right? This is as far as I can get with a bit of spoilers, but not spoilers that would lessen your reading experience if you still want to read the book. The problem with the book, apart from being extremely long in parts, sometimes it can get a bit daunting, is that a lot of the passages in the book are quite homophobic in a way, and they are quite heavily endowed in this idea of elitism. Elitism, of course, is framed as something quite negative, but you have all of these white point of view characters basically, and in the end it's more of an issue that these flawed characters commit the murder within the framework of this elitist background, rather than looking at the implications of studying Greek and this very Eurocentrist point of view in and of itself. And then I just wanted to briefly touch upon the portrayal of Francis in particular. So Francis is portrayed as queer, and from Richard's point of view, this isn't a problem, but then we have the most cliched option of all cliched options. So Francis does hit on him, and Richard is like, oh no, I thought this was going to happen and I was afraid of this happening. So hereby we are reinforcing this idea that all gay men are attracted to all men regardless of anything else, right? And then Francis in one of the scenes basically starts kissing Richard without his consent, which is also a bit weird, and Richard kind of gets into it, but it's framed as something that he wouldn't necessarily want to repeat. And then Francis is always hysteric and kind of anxious, etc., and that in itself is quite a homophobic cliche. Which brings me to Camilla, who is basically a manic pixie dream girl, so only there to advance the plots of all of her male peers, but without any discernible character traits of her own, which is surprising given the fact that this was written by a woman, but not that surprising because it was written in 1992. So we have her, and we have another character called Judy Prudy, who's very superficial and like this California superficial Hollywood type stereotype, doing a lot of drugs, etc. Right, and so there are some issues with internalized sexism as well. The Secret History has been criticized quite a lot by especially queer and BIPOC readers, but that criticism doesn't reach the mainstream readers. And that is one of the main issues with dark academia in and of itself. That the elitism is viewed as something, even if it's framed as bad, because of course they commit murders, as something aspirational. You know, we have these old universities steeped in history, and that history is very white and very much centered on white cis men who decide what's important to learn and what isn't important to learn. All in all, my reading experience of The Secret History was all right. I would give it a total of 3 stars out of 5 if I were to do rating systems. I don't believe in rating systems, but since we're doing a dark academia series, we might as well have a rating system in place. And the reason for that being that it's very well written, but there's not actually that much that happens overall. That was it, my first introduction. I'm feeling kind of faint, which is in line with the mode for this series. So I will be taking a leave of absence now. Goodbye.